I'll sit outside.
And you watch your business just disappear. We have new clients that we know.
Well, you folks all have holiday.
I think we might just.
And I haven't suggested you that without the out the road. Okay. Well, it's only long. So there was one. Forgotten myself tower. So, like, okay, let's go. So I went in, when I was there, absolutely has to be around. So I know the fact that you're out of so much. Attention that has for about until the pandemic. Everything's out. It's gonna go to art festival. But now, the pandemic shut it down, and then like, okay, but that's nice. Well, right, because I have those citizens of there's an app, you can download it.
So there's, I really talk about the car rather than.
Yeah.
Shifts the dynamic. It's a car on the table. Oh, it's not like yeah, it's no longer me having to.
Yeah, all right.
It changes the way.
Well, you know, something happened. Switched up. So I used to be like, now, I've got
All right, so everybody, thanks for making it along this morning. We hope you've enjoyed your breakfast. Yes, I'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. I'm a company director with Pentaquest, the sort of sponsor for today. And we've got three fantastic speakers. New approaches to APS performance and transformation. Performance and transformation, where can I get me some of that? But we've got three great speakers. I'm not one of them. Arrival, we've done that. Networking, we've done that. Coffee and hot breakfast, we've done that. So we must be up to Darren Ivinson. Decades and oodles of experience serving the federal government. And he is the Chief of Digital Societies, is that right? Which is the coolest title. But that's only because I'm a company director, and so I don't really know anything. Please welcome Darren, and be fascinated to hear what he says.
Okay, people can hear me? Yeah, great. So thank you for the introduction, Ben. I am Darren Ivinson, absolutely correct. And I do work for Think Tanks, which is a public good strategic design consultancy. And there's a bit about me. If you take a photo, you can examine that and scrutinize it later. And it's a couple of the roles that I have include a focus on ethics, a focus on what's happening in society and the fact that digital is changing everything about the way we live and work. And also there is some of the work that I do, a lot of thinking around how do we actually start to influence people's behaviours so that we are creating a positive impact on the world. And I want to explore some of that as we move through my talk today. But I'd like to start here. Now, someone can later ask me, how long did it take you to find a photograph that could represent a topic that involves cohorts? And if you ask me that, I'll give you the answer. But, so a few years ago, I was involved in a project that was looking to drive participation in cancer screening. So cancer screening is one of those great public health interventions of the last century. It's in league with vaccination programs for communicable disease. It's in league with hand washing. It's in league with fluoridation of all water supply. And cancer screening can have this mind-blowing impact on cancer mortality. So if you go up towards Northern Europe, cervical screening has had about a 60% decrease in cervical cancer incidence and mortality. Here in Australia, women aged 50 to 69 who screen for breast cancer have about a 30% reduction in the risk of death from the disease. Australia's bowel cancer screening program is modelled and the modelling is based on strong past evidence. It is modelled to prevent 90,000 cancers between now and 2040 and about 59,000 deaths in that same time period. So screening is this incredible medical advance. And really, it's a terrific government investment. It's just got an amazing ROI in terms of health system expenditure. If you just think about the amount of suffering that it will prevent, it's a no-brainer. And yet, current participation rates around the world and in Australia are far from perfect. So take bowel cancer screening. For colorectal screening, Australian participation is about 40% in the target population, which is weird Why would thousands of Australians choose not to participate in a program that can save their life, that is pretty simple, that involves a screening kit that arrives for free in the mail just when you need it at the right age? Why is that? And so as we were conducting these interviews, I remember talking to one patient who was in his early 60s, and he had never screened for bowel cancer, although he really should have been. When I asked him why, he gave an answer that it wasn't about how tricky it was to do. It wasn't about what public health officials sometimes call the yuck factor of colorectal screening. It was about something a bit different. It was about fear. And it was about fear that by completing his screen, he might find out that he had cancer and everything about his life would change. And his attitude was, look, it's best not to know. Best not to know. Well, it's something to that effect. Later in the conversation, I was exploring his motivations about, what would actually trigger him to begin the screen. What are some of the motivating factors? And he came up with a powerful motivator that was the idea that facing his fear would mean that he would be there for his family. So this was interesting. I'm going to return to this in a moment. When we talked to under-screening women about their reaction to the new cervical cancer program, they talked about a lot of kind of factors that were about how they engage with it. Confusion over when do I screen, moving from one type of test to another, when shouldn't I screen, what does screening actually mean? But also, because screening moved from pap smear, which was really about abnormal cells, to effectively an STI test, which was about HPV, there was a lot of fear around, hang on a second, this might actually be a stigmatizing result that I don't want to have to engage with. And that, once again, became a major factor in explaining under-screening in a test that is free, that is life-saving, and that the evidence just says there is absolutely no reason not to participate in it. So overall, our research into under-participation found that there are a number of opportunities where the program could be changed, could be tweaked to make it a bit easier, to make it a bit more understandable. But there was something else going on, something beyond usability, something beyond experience. There was something going on in both of those cases, and that was something we felt we needed to explore. So I'm going to move away from screening for a moment because I want to talk about what we were doing there at sort of a methodological level. So this was really a human-centered design program. And as most of you probably know, human-centered design is about putting people at the center of a design process. So whether you're designing a health service or a regulatory program or a change to your workforce, you engage with users. You find out about their needs, you find out about their pain points, you find out about what their barriers are. And building up that evidence base, you then work out how to alleviate the pain points, how to make things easier, how to answer the needs that you've surfaced. So it sounds simple, but really this has been a breakthrough approach for government over 20 years, and it's massively improved satisfaction among citizens, it's improved compliance, it's improved service adoption, and when it's applied to APS workforces, it has really transformed productivity and transformed impact. So it's almost like this equation that the design has. And it used to be quite a simple equation. 20 years ago, we talked about the fact that when you wanted to get a community outcome, you thought about the experience that you were creating. Every time you have a user experience, you said, I satisfied that we satisfied needs, we reduced pain points as much as possible. And if you did that enough, you'd start to get all the things that led you to your outcome. But then in the early 2000s, something happened. So I just want to say that in this equation, experience really does become the central pillar of design and of community outcome. So back in the early 2000s, there was a new pillar that was added to the equation. So at the time, the tax office had been on this sort of roller coaster ride. Some people here remember the phrase, not a new tax, a new tax system. Do you remember that? And you might also remember some headlines that happened shortly after the campaign. So the GST implementation under the Howard government in 2000 didn't go totally smoothly. The tax office were still smarting for a while about criticism they'd received on the complexity of post-GST tax compliance. Small and medium enterprises have not had an easy time filing their tax. The Bowel was a problem. Beleaguered business owners, beleaguered tax agents, they were pretty pissed off, and they made that known. Tax officers have always been cautious about admitting where they worked when they were in a taxi. And I was a tax officer around about that time. And I remember, when you're going to a taxi and the taxi driver goes, "Oh, where do you work?" And you go, "Oh, it's the Treasury." And that was the standard time. And the reason behind that was, if you admitted that you worked for the tax office, you'd spend the next 25 minutes refusing to give tax advice to your driver. But after the GST, that all changed. Well, we still didn't admit that we worked for the tax office, but now it was for a totally different reason. Because once you did it, the tax driver would be saying, "What on earth were you thinking of the GST?" And that was just people wondering why it's suddenly so hard. So the commissioner at the time, Michael Carmody, responded to the situation by declaring that the tax office needed to transform into a human-centred, back then a user-centred organisation. And he engaged academic overseas, a professor named Richard Buchanan, who worked at Carnegie Mellon University. And in the conversations that they had, Richard Buchanan's sort of what he brought to the conversation was this notion of designing the system, what he called thoughtful design. So he just finished applying human-centered design to the full end-to-end design of one of the world's largest logistics organizations, the United States Postal Service. And he advised Michael and the executive that a change was needed, but it wasn't a change that was about making a more usable tax. It was about a change that was totally transforming the system, the big picture tax system, the rules, the processes, systems, IT systems, data, the culture, the underlying philosophy. And it needed to start with engaging the taxpayer to learn about their needs and pain points, but then translating these into big picture design requirements for the tax system. And ultimately, it began a 10-year journey that saw the tax office engage in what turned out to be an $800 million change program, a transformation program, that basically completely re-engineered the way tax worked in Australia. And over the course of that, I do believe that they did become a human-centred organisation. It really is at the heart of their philosophy about how they administer the system. But in addition to doing that, in addition to shaping our tax system, it did something different. It did something transformative to human-centred design. So really, it was about saying, we need to get the experience right, but unless you can look at the system that sits underneath it and make changes there, no matter what you do, that experience is still going to be an experience in a place that isn't achieving the community outcome. You've got to be able to zoom out and think about the system design. So that was exciting. And I think that thinking has really, I will say, pretty much the tax office was at that stage a world leader in the application of design to public administration. I don't think there was another agency that had sort of woven it in to that extent. And then that sort of percolated out to the rest of the APS and there's some amazing agencies doing human intent. Just as we were nailing this new pillar of human-centered, the world began to notice behavior. And around 2009, I think the APS really got introduced to behavioral economics. It really got introduced to the idea of things like nudging and behavior analytics and those types of ideas. And just to think about this, what is behavior? There are lots of definitions of behavior. I'm going to give you my informed definition, which is behavior is how we give effect to values, to priorities. Behaviors aren't just actions we take, they're an expression of our beliefs, they're an expression of our motivations, our interests, and our fears. So if the system is the big wide world, and the experience is your touch point with the big wide world, then behavior is the big inner world. It's the bit of you that has been formed over your life and is ultimately the expression of that big inner world. In fact, that's what that slide says. And so that is the challenge. When we think about design, we can't just think about the experience anymore, although that's what comes with it. We can't just think about the system anymore, because as complex as that is, you can design a system, but you can't design a person. Instead, you have to empathetically, you have to compassionately understand what drives that person, understand what drives their behavior, and design for that. Design to intervene where it's going to help them, help society, and help the organisation achieve community impact. And I say a person like I'm talking about one person, but obviously understanding behaviours at a population level, at a cohort level, that's where the power of behavioural design really starts to take effect. So now we have a third pillar. We've got our experience, we've got the system, and we've got behavioural barriers, and we have to get all that right. And there are strategies that we have to start to intervene in the behavioural side of the design in the world, and those being expressed as a behaviour. And if we modification, really fantastic strategy to start to think about how you design for that big in the world. Behavior analytics, really fantastic strategy about how you design for that big in the world. There's this really, there are some amazing things happening around the world with this. One that I particularly like was this experiment by Siemens, where they actually got their workforce involved in this app. Basically, they had to track when they were doing things that were going to reduce their personal carbon dioxide emissions footprint. And every time they did, it became gamified, and they got points and badges. And effectively, it was playing to things like people want to be recognised. They want to be recognised for the things that they do. They want things that are going to tie to their values, tie to their motivations. They're going to want things that are going to be sensitive to their fears and do a way of alleviating them. In a very positive, in a very a way that is all about impact of alleviating them. In a very positive, in a very a way that is all about impact. And I've heard that the public service is made up of humans, so it's got in the world. As part of my writing this talk, I wrote in the Gonski review. I don't know why, but I meant Fogey. I think it's because they both came with a 9-1. But I think the Gonski review actually, I could be talking about that in terms of the education system and teacher and parent behaviour just as much as the public service, because there are humans there. But in the Fogey review, and I'm just going to quote, they mentioned behaviour 43 times. When they were talking about behaviour, one thing they said was there are 4 factors that would enable necessary changes within the APS to ensure that it continues to support the government and provide outstanding service to Australians. And then there was this really great line which says, to change culture, you need clear and persuasive communication about the change in the behaviours required. So you've actually got to say, what is the behaviour that we need? You can't just assume that people understand that. You're making a change. You need to connect them to the behaviours that are going to help them thrive and help governments create more and more impact for the citizens. Leaders need to role model changes in what they do. The organisation needs to build its capabilities for people to deliver results, and incentives are needed. Behaviours. So not only are you trying to connect people to the right behaviours, but you're thinking, and how do you actually incentivise this? Not in sort of a manipulative way, but that's the challenge. There are lots of behaviours that the APS needs and has them, but not everyone is participant. Tony talked about flexibility, talked about innovation, talked about collaboration as a norm. If you look more widely, the OECD says that there are some behaviours that are going to be absolutely critical for thriving public services around the world. One of my favourite ones is the behaviour known as insurgency, or the willingness to challenge, go outside the norm, even if it means losing some friends along the way. And all of those are choices people make about how they express their big in the world, how they connect their big in the world to the system. And therefore, if they can be the subject of design. So without designing for behaviour, we're only designing for 2/3 of the problem. And the final third is where we recognise that human beings are complex. They've got complex neurologies, And if we ignore that, we won't necessarily achieve the impact that we want. So that is my final message, I guess, which is we just need to make sure that that third pillar is front and centre when we think about how we do transformational change. And nowhere is that more true. Thank you.
The fly on the wall in a lot of your meetings. All right. Who is Assistant Director of Human Resources at the Australian Research Council. So, all right. Tell us about it.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Linda Marshall. I'm the Assistant Director of the Australian Research Council. I'm a certified practitioner in HR and I have about 30 years experience, actually over 30 years experience. I don't know what that means. Industry and various other industries. I am really lucky. I have an awesome team of superheroes that work with me to look after the AA. Rebecca put this together for me, which I just tweaked. So I apologise if I'm not right on track today. My husband and I are really lucky to go and travel around New South Wales. We went to all Cameron Corner and all these awesome places just to get out of the norm. We were out of service and it was fantastic. And we decided to come home. Didn't want to go back to work yesterday, but we did it. With around 160 public servants, contractors and executive level academic staff. We're Canberra based and we're very professional mix of people who administer the national program for the government to the research sector. This means that we don't have researchers that work with us, we administer the grants and look after and deal with the university. That provides to assess the benefits of the research comes across the Australian community. I commend from a larger agency, and I had this idea that working with a smaller agency would provide me with, I might be bored, but I was wrong. We're able to try and act and impact projects you have with other people in the agency. You get to know everyone, and sometimes you get to know everything about everyone. We are a large family. He's with us as well, and he pops up every day. This can be a dry subject, and sometimes people really struggle talking about performance management. But let me share. Oh God. Okay. We started working with PeakQuest in our journey to changing the conversation about performance management in 2017. Instead of this being a HR lead activity, we established a working group, different branches, different levels. We wanted something we could actually make agency owned. The working group wanted to move away from the stagnant model of the review process every 6 months. Process. The dreaded feeling comes up in your gut, and all the issues over the last year that you mightn't actually remember or know about, you've forgotten, but someone hasn't. Away from the pure compliance tick and flick model and focusing on a rating, that was hard work, to really getting to engage with staff on how to develop the performance of them, and wanting to look ahead of their careers, but still developing the way that they need to and do present themselves. Because if you get to know someone, you have a trusting relationship. We found they had a huge fixation on ratings, and the start of being, if you've been given exceeds expectations, you're going to have that for the rest of your career. That's what the expectation was. So we moved away from that, and we went, you meet expectations or you don't meet expectations. We don't have performance pay, so it wasn't linking to anything. There was no actual additional value in it. To develop the new scheme, we wanted to make the change. We wanted to develop a new scheme. We wanted to consider our options and look at what other industries were doing besides the public sector. The current scheme we were working with, and it doesn't work, is a paper looking backwards and not developing our staff. It was a tick and flick exercise that everyone hated and really didn't get much out of. What other agencies and organisations were doing to ensure that we didn't bring inspiration. Specifically, we looked at IP communications. We also looked at Google, because we thought they might have something interesting that we can learn. We looked at advice from other organisations. We went to the APSC, which is the Australian Public Service Commission, and looked at their optimising performance and strengthening performance framework. The best practice ensured we covered and advice. We also looked at research on individual elements, including the law of performance, the meaningful conversation, as well as the ratings and how they affect the brain. Change. We did our own research and we went looking for advice. Here we go for public service spec. The legislative requirements of performance management process as a found in 2016. The direction said that we didn't need to receive a rating, we just needed to have an open and honest conversation. We could confirm that the structure of performance management underperforming employees at risk of sanction, that we thought what would the correct process be, what we needed to do. As long as we followed, we would be okay. There was high levels of frustration and we just needed someone to give us a bit of willingness to take some risk. So the working group did that. We didn't get rid of them altogether because we couldn't do the job or not doing the job. And finally, we considered the working group's personal thoughts and preferences with ad hoc feedback. We wanted to create the dream scheme of leadership development, which contains three main pillars. Leadership at all levels, continuous development, and supporting high-performing teams. And we wanted more. The working group was keen to turn the conversation not necessarily on what the employee did, but to focus on how RC took. We've got all our public service stuff together, we've got development placements together, we have all this stuff that we need to drag on, we had individual learning, leadership stuff, we had work level standards, so we put it into one page. So each level had one page they need to look at. We then started to push things back down to our APS 5s and supervising had crept at the development for our staff, which we've actually succeeded in doing. That was a hard slog. We revisited our rewards and recognition and development through the APS, but only for high performance. And we conducted a lot of on-site online training and opened the agency to attend policy writing. We've done mandatory monthly e-learning. They're probably sick of it because every month they have to do something. The agency didn't have a formal framework, incorporated small things like Congratus that we have through the Pentaquest system that we use, which has been able to give this through, we call it drive. And we've had branch recognition awards, development and innovation awards, Australia Day awards, length of service awards. And we acknowledge our employees for what you see and the great work they do. We have people that play Candy Crush and love a candy blast, and they love collecting points. In line with the general APS approach, paper-based document to a fluid, flexible. That is where Drive came from. We can, in conjunction with our IT projects group, we assess the sustainability agency. We don't have a budget for this stuff. The Department of Industry, in conjunction with Pentaquest, had developed a pilot program called REV, which is a game developed and Drive was born. For us, the system linked to awards and professional development. It was flexible. Our staff instantly able to complete goals. Other systems that were incredibly difficult to update information. The system was goal orientated. The benefits. We identified a number of benefits. Some of them were looking at having the conversation differently across the organisation. We have a majority of our staff that now meet are starting to go grey. If there's an issue, they can fix it easily. They've got a trusting relationship. They've built it. We still have small, but they're getting used to it. We keep pushing it along all the time. It comes down from our CEO. She regularly meets directly with her reports, in the direct access system from our internet page, front and centre, you can see it, it's visual. And they can access it from their mobiles as well now. Both the advisors are able to access the staff members' page at any time, regular catch up. It's easy to change, so if someone changes a job, they can change what they're doing. System now, which we couldn't from a paper-based system. And we can supply information to branch managers, directors, learning survey. So they gather points for everything they do. National Reconciliation Week. In our drive system, some of our staff members can merch, which has got branding on it, a drink bottle, a power pack, a blanket. Our office is freezing. The blanket be branded saying we work for the APS. Drive is a gamified system which adds an element of fun to performance management. The good thing about Drive is the staff and it's not about setting up what you're going to have, what you've done in the past for the period. It's about looking at what you're going to do in the future. We need to achieve this and checking in regularly with the added or altering of tasks, which in turn builds your performance discussion with your manager. You've completed your checklist and tasks have been achieved. It gave us the flexibility to alter, tweak, signing off on something that was completely different to what you were doing at the start of your performance cycle. Everyone's job changes as it goes along. When I used to do my, so we were looking for other things. Lessons to share. Changing culture in an organisation is hard. It doesn't happen overnight, and sometimes you take 2 steps forward, 1 back, 1 to the side, go around again and try to get there. Getting buy-in from staff is still an ongoing process. We probably have people that use 60% that use it and love it, but we have a lot of people who just don't like change, and that's with anything. They transitioned home really well out of COVID though, so they transitioned back now. We continue to evolve after it being implemented for a while, asking for feedback and back on board. And this is what we're going to do and how we're going to. It's the key to ongoing engagement with the staff. We still have staff that look at it twice a year, but that's okay. To the new way. And the thing to think about is being kind to yourself and others. It's hard work. And we've been flogging it for 3 years, but we're starting to.
Thanks, Linda. Sounds like a lot of determination is required.
We are determined, aren't we?
Fantastic. Okay, so we've got one more speaker. I'd like to Dr. Kirsten Odenfield. I'm going to say a few words about you, Kirsten. She's the pretty much the founder and came up with the whole Pentacrest support from Place and some other ecosystem partners. Incredible work to create this thing. She's got a PhD in behavioural psychology and one of the most interesting. She's also one of the friendliest humans I know, notwithstanding the fact that she's got a 50 black belt in Taekwondo, represented Australia and spent years on the world.
Thank you, Ben. Don't worry, no Taekwondo moves coming out today. With you that stem from both my academic research from my PhD as well as my professional experience. And we heard some really interesting things from Darren and Linda, both from a systemic perspective as well as a practical, how do you implement change and transformation in an organisation. So what I'd like to share with you is some steps for how do you get to the transformation that you're looking for. So I see all the time that when I work with executives and leaders, some of the common challenges that they face. So they are struggling with how to align culture with strategy and do this in a meaningful way. Or they're frustrated by manager capability and looking at how do you lift this and how do you get consistent performance across the organisation. Or they're working out how do I keep my workforce engaged while they're dispersed and working in different time zones as well. So before we sort of look forward, I want to take a quick moment to look back. So when we look at the business world, a lot has changed. But some of these changes have actually been in the making for years and possibly even decades. So if you look back at the 1400s, what was the predominant thinking of the day? Well, it was in relation to exploring the world, mapping out what is the shape of the world, what does it look like? And a lot of the resources were going into building maps and the age of discovery. Fast forward a little bit to the Renaissance, where the focus was on arts, learning, culture, philosophy. Then through to the 1600s and the birth of the modern sciences. So the foundations of maths, science, astronomy, chemistry, biology were all forged in this time. Then through to the Industrial Revolution, so looking at going from agriculture to economy, production, manufacturing, through to the information age that we're living in today and the use of technology. And 20 and going forward, the challenges are different. So we're looking at employee engagement, customer attention and retention, the self and well-being, looking at the environment and sustainability, and political engagement and policy making. So what do all of these challenges have in common? Well, they can all be examined through the lens of human behaviour. So in our age, the predominant thinking and focus is on how do we harness human capital and collaboration. So I would argue that the current revolution of thinking is behavioural science. So what is behavioural science? Well, it's the study of human behaviour, and it encompasses a range of different fields. Neuroscience, social psychology, behavioural economics, gamification, human-computer interface, and more. And you can see from this graph over here just how much the field of behavioural science has grown. Right from 1979, when Kahneman and Tversky first published their paper looking at behavioural science, it has grown exponentially. Kahneman went on to win the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002 for bringing psychology out of the lab and into the real world. And it's been 10 years since Thaler and Sunstein published the book Nudge. It's a best-selling book. No doubt you've heard that term or the book, because those concepts have now worked their way into the everyday business and popular vernacular. And 100 behavioural insights teams across governments globally. And that's not just applying to citizens, but also to their people. So behavioural science gives us the structure, the methodology, and the vocabulary. But the problem is, a lot of executives and leaders still are not sure how to take advantage of behavioural science. They're still not sure, how do I use this when I'm looking to transform my organisation and take my people along the journey? But the good news is you can leverage it, and I'm going to share some of the steps with you today. So the first step is that you need to break the transformation down into its behavioural components. So if you want your organisation to be more human-centred, well, what does that mean? If you were to point a camera at the problem, what would you see? If you want your organisation to be more innovative, what is the action that you see? Is it people picking up the phone, speaking to someone from another team? Is it people putting post-its up on the wall? If you were to point a camera at the behaviour, what would you see? The second is that the behaviour needs to be small, relevant, and frequent. So if you look at, for example, your Fitbit or your Apple Watch or your Garmin, those are devices and an article that says, here is why 10,000 steps a day is healthy for you. But that's not going to change your behaviour, is it? No. We know that information alone doesn't change the behaviour. But if I insert something into your life, something that buzzes, that says, Kirsten, stand up, go for a walk, then I'm a lot more likely to do that behaviour. And if you or someone you know has ever done a few laps around the living room at night just to reach the 10,000 step mark, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Is that you need to nudge this behaviour often. Scientists used to think that it takes 30 days, 21 or 30 days to form a new habit. But recent research actually says that it takes 66 instances of the behavior for it to form a habit. So you need to do the behavior 66 times in context before it becomes automated. So this is where adding in reward systems can be a really useful way. Gamification is a really useful one to add a sense of engagement, add a bit of fun and positivity to make those to do those behaviors 66 times. Now, and using a digital system to do that has several benefits. Firstly, it's systematic. So you can roll it out across the whole organization to make sure that you're touching everybody in the same way. It's scalable, so it doesn't matter where, instant data, so instant feedback for the individual, but it also gives you as leaders data that you can use to understand how your transformation is going and where along that transformation journey you're at. And then finally, this type of approach and this methodology can be applied to any type of change. So you need to look for both quick wins, tactical outcomes, as well as the larger transformation opportunities. So you could apply this approach to learning and development and getting people to making sure that they're engaging with their training and enacting that. It could be for performance management, as we heard from Lyndall. It could be about embracing a new way, whether it be human-centered, like what Darren spoke about, being innovative, you name it. So, I've shared with you the 5 steps for how to achieve transformation using behavioural science. To close off, I'd like to invite you to think about how might you apply this into your workplace when you leave here today. So I've got a few reflection questions for you. If you could create culture and engagement and change in your workplace, what difference would that make? What difference would that make to you and your role? What difference would that make to your team? What difference would that make for your whole organisation? If you were to be an effective change agent, how might your behaviour look different? And what would that look like? If you were to point a camera at your own behaviour, what would that look like? How could you consistently nudge your workplace in the direction that you want? Understanding it needs to be brought that the change is systematic, scalable, and measurable. And finally, what are the tactical and the strategic opportunities that you could apply this approach to? Thank you.
Kirsten. So we're nearly done. There's a couple of options people have coming out of this workshop. We'd like to think we've presented something that might give you extra resources. We certainly hope so, since we've taken up your time, at least for breakfast. First option is just sort of take this knowledge on, incubate it, and just see how it expresses itself in your life and your work. We hope it does. The other option is DIY, do it yourself, which plenty of people do effectively. No, if you feel like it, let us know if this has been of any to you and what ideas you've learned from this and what you might implement in your work and whether this made any difference. We'd be delighted to hear that. We are available to help. We do this day in, day out. Kirsten's done this stuff. I've got a lot of experience with government. Book later, you can book Kirsten up for a 30-minute discussion if you have. If you think you want to just have a good old chat about this and really explore. Do my darndest to make a contribution. So thank you all for coming today. If you have time to stick around, please, chat to myself, Kirsten, Belinda, Darren, Lyndall, and we look forward to catching up with you another time, we hope. Thanks.
It's definitely not supposed to be different. It's the same as it's on. Just like that. That's next week's trouble to deal with it. You're supposed to be
That's true, it's interesting. Yes.
Oh, yeah. I know. Isn't it like something